Excuse me, good afternoon. My name is Amanda Rivera. I'm the hearing examiner presiding over today's case. The date is March 1st, 2023, and this is case SEZ2022-00003 and VAR2022-00006. It's a special exception and variance request for a wireless communication facility in Lehigh Acres. Because this is a quasi-judicial hearing, all evidence and testimony must be taken under oath. So if you intend to speak, if you could please raise your hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you will provide is the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Do we have members of the public here this afternoon? Yes? Okay. So the way that we'll go through things today is first we're going to hear from the applicant. They're going to present their request in the case and call any witnesses that they may have to support that request. Following that, we will hear from the county staff. They will go over their recommendation in the case, which is a recommendation of approval, both for the special exception and for the variance requests. After that, we will open up the public comment portion. That is when I'll call forward the names of the cards that I have here, and you can place any comments that you have onto the record. If you have questions, please know that we'll be taking note of those, but we likely won't answer them at the time. We'll come back to the applicant and the staff and answer those questions all at once. After we conclude public comment, we'll come back to the applicant and the staff for rebuttal and then any closing comments that they may have. So with that, we can get started with the applicant. Good afternoon.
And is this active?
It should be, yes.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Madam Hearing Examiner. My name is Kaylee Tuck with Henderson Franklin on behalf of the applicant, Tillman Infrastructure, LLC.
Okay, slow down already.
Yes, ma'am.
Kaylee
Tuck with Henderson Franklin. And you can just yell at me. I take it pretty well. We're here today for case numbers SEZ2022-00003 and VAR2022-00006 to request a special exception and variances to construct a 155-foot wireless communication facility. The property is located at 907 Edward Avenue in Lehigh Acres. The property is a narrow strip of land between Joel Boulevard and Edward Avenue, lying north of 9th Street. The actual parcel is a 75-foot by 75-foot leased area on the southernmost portion of the parent parcel, which you'll see right here in the center of the two streets. And the property has a current zoning of C2, commercial, with a central urban future land use category and is presently vacant. The surrounding land uses are generally similar. All surrounding properties are located within the central urban future land use category, and the properties to the north and south are both zoned C2 and are either vacant or vacant with a paved right-of-way. The property to the east is zoned RS1 and has a paved right-of-way in between some vacant and residential property, and the property to the west is zoned RM2 and similar situation, paved right-of-way and then residential uses. So our request is twofold. The first request is for a special exception, which is required by LDC section 34-1447B, providing that a special exception is required for towers over 90 feet in height for commercially zoned areas. The second request is for several variances. The first variance is pursuant to LDC section 34-1447B, which provides that a variance is required in addition to a special exception for towers exceeding 149 feet. And the second variance consists of a series of setback variances pursuant to LDC section 34-1447E1, which states that setbacks must be equal to the overall height of the tower, 155 feet in this case. So just an overview of the specific request. The special exception is a request to allow the construction of the 155-foot tower pursuant to that prior code requirement. And then the variances are, number one, the height requirement, which is an additional 6 feet over what the code requests for a special exception. The eastern setback is a variance of 96 feet to allow for a 59-foot setback. Western setback is a variance of 96 feet to allow for a 59-foot setback as well.
Okay.
Going too fast again? Sorry about that.
Okay, start over with the eastern setback is a variance of 56 feet.
The eastern setback.
96, I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am, 96 feet to allow for a 59-foot setback. The western setback is a variance of 96 feet to allow for a 59-foot setback as well. And the southern setback is a variance of 92 feet to allow for a 63-foot setback. So we'll start with the special exception criteria found in LDC 34-145C3. Pursuant to this criteria, the applicant must prove, 1, that the development is consistent with the goals and objectives, policies, and intent of the Lee Plan. Applicant believes this to be the case and will provide further analysis at the end of the presentation with regard to comprehensive plan consistency. Number 2, the development will protect, conserve, and preserve environmentally critical and sensitive areas and natural resources where applicable. In this particular situation, as you'll see in the staff report, the FWC has determined that a monopole design that does not include guy wires under 200 feet is not a danger to the federally listed species. Number 3, applicant must prove that the development will be compatible with existing and proposed, existing and planned uses. Applicant is aware of the LDC regulations and will adhere to such with the surrounding areas and in the development order and building permit phase. The tower itself will be located on a narrow strip of land that is poised for commercial development, and the dimension of the property makes commercial development scarce when it comes to the setbacks. The property is also surrounded on 3 sides by paved rights-of-way of varying categories, and the tower is positioned in the center of the leased area such that it optimizes the separation from the existing surrounding residential uses. Number 4, applicant must prove that the tower will not be injurious to the neighborhood or detrimental to the public welfare. We did the balloon test a little early so we could provide visual representations of what it's going to look like to the neighborhood, and that'll be on the following slides. Landscape buffering will be used to make sure that at eye level it's a very minimal visual impact. And then the tower is designed, as will be testified to later on, to collapse within the leased area, so there are no issues with the surrounding roadways. So here we have a visual representation of the tower. You'll see the before and after. So the top picture is the before, the bottom picture is the after, and this is based on the balloon tests. Same thing here. Top picture is before, bottom picture is after, and if you look right north of the roadway, you'll see the tower right there. And at number 5, applicant must show that the tower will be in compliance with zoning regulations pertaining to the use and other applicable regulations. As previously noted, applicant is able to meet all other zoning regulations and will be prepared to meet these regulations further at the development order and building permit phase as well. In addition to the standard special exception criteria, applicant is required to show that the tower meets criteria specific to wireless communication facilities. First, applicant is not able to use existing wireless communication facility sites in the geographic search area. The geographic search area is depicted here, and as will be testified to by our RF engineer later on in the presentation, the nearest tower is a 150-foot flagpole design that is not suitable for deployment of 5G equipment. Number 2, for the specific criteria, the applicant has agreed to rent or lease available space on the antenna supporting structure under the terms of a fair market lease without discrimination to other wireless communication service providers. Applicant has executed a shared use plan that's in the packet in the original application as well, and the tower is designed to accommodate additional carriers, and additional carriers will be able to rent at a fair market rate. Number 3, the proposed antenna supporting structure will not be injurious to historical resources, obstruct scenic views, diminish residential property values, or reduce the quality and function of natural or man-made resources. As previously noted, the tower is situated within a commercial node surrounded by 3 paved right-of-ways and is situated to optimize separation from the surrounding residential areas. And then number 4, the applicant has agreed to implement all reasonable measures to mitigate the potential adverse impacts of the structures and facilities. And we have agreed to implement all reasonable measures to mitigate these potential adverse effects. There are a couple of conditions that staff recommended in its recommendation for approval, and we are okay with all conditions and will meet any further conditions in the development order and, the building permit phase. So moving on to the variance criteria. Variance criteria is very similar to the special exception criteria in that there are 2, the standard criteria and the specific criteria. So for the first criteria, the property has inherent exceptional conditions that cause the applicant of the regulation to create a hardship on the property owner. As previously mentioned, and as you can probably see in the diagrams, this is a very narrow commercial lot. It doesn't have the opportunity for traditional commercial development like any other commercial lot would. It's surrounded by the south, east, and west by rights-of-way, which further restricts development. And we positioned the location the way we did because of the existing surrounding residential areas. It optimizes the separation from residential sites. Excuse me one second. Number two, the exceptional conditions are not the result of actions of the property owner. The property configuration is part of the Lehigh Acres plat and was created before zoning regulations were in place. Number three, the variance granted is the minimum variance that will relieve the unreasonable burden. So we situated the tower in the middle of the leased area, which was the exact middle of the property, to minimize the east and the west variances necessary. When it comes to the south variance, that situation is so that we can optimize the separation from the residential areas as previously mentioned. And I'm sorry, Madam Hearing Examiner, I have the exhibits before you.
Thank you. Yes, that would be helpful. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So I will do applicant's exhibit 1 will be the PowerPoint presentation. We did have two, I should say that on the record. We had two prior 48-hour notices. There was an amendment to the initial, so the initial 48-hour notice is applicant's exhibit A, and then the revised was applicant's exhibit B. And then applicant's exhibit 1 will be the PowerPoint. And 2, this is the composite of the site plan.
It is, yes.
And it's identical to what was provided in the staff report?
It was.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you.
All right, number 4, the granting of the variance will not be injurious to the neighborhood or detrimental to the public welfare. As previously mentioned, the site is surrounded by 3 rights-of-way of varying categories, and the tower is designed to collapse on itself. Like I mentioned, we'll hear from one of our engineers to testify to that later on. And it's also situated to optimize separation with the residential. And the variance is consistent with the BLE plan. As I mentioned, we'll go into an analysis of consistency with the comprehensive plan later on. And then when it gets to the specific criteria for wireless communication facilities, number 1 is denial would have the effect of prohibiting the provision of personal wireless services. We have an RF engineer here to testify to the low service levels that are already in the area and how this will greatly increase those service levels. Number 2, denial would unreasonably discriminate among providers of functionally equivalent personal wireless services. The tower will allow other providers to co-locate without discrimination at a fair market rate. Number 3, the variance is necessary to ensure adequate public safety and emergency management communications. And as I mentioned, our RF engineer will testify. If you look at the service levels, the service levels that this will provide at an increased level will allow for better 911 communication, better commuter communication, and things of that nature. Number 4, we didn't believe this was applicable to this particular site. Same thing with number 5. We're not providing amateur radio services. Number 6, the variance will obviate the need for additional antenna supporting structures in the geographic area. You'll see in the packet the geographic search area, and there's only one tower that's about a half-mile away, which is the 150-foot flagpole tower that doesn't meet the 5G technology requirements.
And on that point, it might be a better question for the engineer, but is the expectation then that as all of the carriers move to 5G technology that the old 150, is that what you said it was? Will that one no longer be required or necessary, or would there still be 2 towers? I can ask the question of the engineer if that's...
Yeah, we will have happy to testify to that with the RF engineer. And then moving on to comprehensive plan consistency, the first and obvious one is that this is within the central urban future land use category, which is considered to be the urban core of the county. As I mentioned, this is a commercial node and it is a commercial thoroughfare, so it's meant to satisfy commercial development, and with the dimensions of this property, it's not fit for traditional commercial development, but the provision of additional wireless communication services will help the commercial and the residential around the area.
And on that point, I'm sorry to interrupt again.
No,
There
you're
was
good.
reference of a DO that was on the site, I think in 2015. So is this development plan consistent with what the DO provided, or would this be replacing the DO that's currently active?
This would be replacing the DO. I believe that active DO was for a tire repair store.
I'm not sure.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm happy to get that info though, but that's my recollection from the original research.
But essentially, it wasn't clear again from the materials whether this would be located in such a manner that the development plan could still move forward, or if this was in lieu of that original commercial development plan.
I'm happy to follow up. I remember pulling those plans and I believe this would interfere with that development.
Thank you.
So the next policy is policy 5.1.5, which is protecting existing and future residential areas. As I mentioned previously in the presentation, the tower is situated so that it doesn't disrupt the residential areas surrounding this. We will have a very robust landscape plan that will shield and camouflage the equipment at ground level, and then the visual representation showed that it won't be, the visual impacts will be minor. And then policy 65.1.7 is to maintain and where feasible, enhance the 911 emergency communications, which we'll specifically speak to when we call Patrick Keene up as the RF engineer. And then when it comes to the Lehigh Acres planning community, this is within the Lehigh Acres planning community, which specifically requires a community meeting. We had one of those meetings on June 6, 2022. We stayed at the meeting site for about an hour from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. and no members of the public showed up. And then we have some expert witnesses here who will testify. The first one will be Brandon Bergeron, professional engineer with SMW Engineering Group. So with your permission, I'd like to call him up to testify to the structural.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. As previously stated, my name is Brandon Bergeron, a professional engineer with SMW Engineering Group, and I'm here to testify to the overall design of the tower. After reviewing the design plans and the supplemental documents provided by the tower owner, we are in agreement that should the tower reach any critical capacity, it is designed to buckle upon itself, thus satisfying any clear zone issues that the county might have.
So so the collapse area would be within the lease site, the 75 by
Yes.
75?
Yes, most likely. I don't know if I can necessarily say for sure within the 75. Does that take us to the outskirts of the to the right of way?
It does.
Okay, yeah. So it will certainly be within the 75 to 75. Yep.
Okay. And that would be in the event of?
Critical
event?
failure. Yeah, most likely with T-Mobile being the initial installation, it would be most likely in the case of severe winds, if any. And yeah, the tower is designed to buckle upon itself, either at the point of failure or at a pre-designed buckle point. And yeah, the tower should stay within the clearances.
Do the number of antennas or carriers that are co-located on the tower affect that in any manner? Or is that anticipated at the construction time?
I would say technically yes. I mean, the more carriers on there, the more that the tower is being pushed towards its max capacity. But the exact point of failure on the tower would have to be analyzed to a further extent, depending on the amount of carriers on the tower at the time.
Do you know how many carriers it's anticipated that the tower would accommodate? I think right now there's only one.
Yeah, the initial installation would just be the T-Mobile RAD center. I believe in the zoning drawings, we show maybe 2 other RAD centers for future carriers, but that is completely TBD, and that would be completely dependent upon what carriers need coverage in the area.
Thank you. Did staff have any questions?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Examiner, and Brandon's resume is included in the packet I sent. And next up will be Patrick Keene. He's the Senior RF Design Engineer for T-Mobile.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Patrick Keene, 1368 Northwest 86th Way. I have been sworn in. I'm here today in support of the application for a new tower. I was the engineer I worked for T-Mobile. I was the engineer that prepared the radio frequency or RF engineering report. And part of my responsibilities and my colleagues is identifying areas where we have service deficiencies, where we need to improve service, and then proposing solutions. In this case, we have a service deficiency in this part of Lehigh Acres along Joel Boulevard and surrounding residential, some commercial, where the 5G service is not adequate to support all of the customers and other people using the phones like they would like to, the full capacity. The reason for that is that we are currently have antennas on a tower a half mile north of the proposed location, about a half mile. And we have 5G installed at that tower, but it's what we call constraint design. So it's kind of like having a 5-lane highway, but we only have 2 lanes open. So we're not able to deploy the full suite of 5G equipment to provide those 5G services, the full suite of 5G services. And that has a big impact on our day-to-day lives in terms of how you use your phone. So we do provide a 5G signal. It's the footprint or the coverage service area is smaller than what a full-size tower would be able to support. And also the different channels or different frequencies because of the additional equipment and service features. So it's not, the old tower is not compatible with the new 5G equipment, and that's really the bottom line. So is there any other points you'd like to, okay, so these are some of the concerns. And now, as a radio frequency engineer, I don't have the, I'm not doing structural analysis or sizing. I'm just making proposals, but I do look at results for structural analysis. So, like on the far left is a profile of the flagpole, and in older flagpoles, it's my experience when you propose large equipment sets, the tower structural analysis, which I don't perform, but the structural engineers perform, will come back and say, hey, it failed. You can't do that because the equipment's too heavy and it's too large. And in a similar way, we can look at the dimensions of the antennas and say they're just not going to fit in there. I mean, I don't need to be a structural engineer to see that. And in an operational constraint that we have with the new 5G equipment is that it's susceptible to overheating. So in an enclosed space, such as the bottom right-hand side, is what is a similar tower to what currently exists, the flagpole. So you're looking inside the flagpole right there. And you can see it's a very tight space. And so if you put these radios, these transceivers inside of that canister, they have a tendency to overheat because the airflow there's no airflow. And we've had limited success retrofitting towers in this situation with fans and passive cooling, such as louvers or ventilation holes. So the best solution is to have the radios as they're designed, to be outdoors. So they're ruggedized, they're larger, they're heavier, but they provide a lot more performance characteristics, a higher performance characteristic. And when I say radio, so there's antennas and we have radio. So when I say radio, it's just a box that sends signals and receives signals. If you have a Wi-Fi router in your house, that's a transceiver. It's the same thing. Of course, on a tower, it's bigger and more powerful. So that's the concerns from why we can't put that on, coming from my experience as a radio frequency engineer.
Next slide.
And then when I go back to my point about defining or determining service deficiencies, we look at population as one of our prime considerations. This area here is mostly residential. There's some commercial, a couple connecting roads. And so we look at what is our service today and how can we improve our service tomorrow. And so this is just a study done. On the left-hand side is the service today. Green is good, orange is bad. And on the right-hand side is the improved service once we relocate on the new tower and add the new equipment. So you can see that just visually there's a coverage footprint increase, and that means that all those, so I've color-coded the houses there, and all those light blue houses on the right indicate where the signal got better. It's very, it's very straightforward. There's no, and then we just break it up into most reliable service, and poor service. And so we gain, just by adding this new coverage, we had a 40% improvement in the number of residences that have this most reliable service. And that's important nowadays too, because I'm speaking for T-Mobile, I guess, as a salesperson here. We do provide home internet now as a competition for the local, where I live, it's AT&T, so now I don't need AT&T. If I have a good signal, I can use T-Mobile, and I'm sure AT&T and Verizon have similar services. So it's good for the consumer. And another thing we look at is 911 calls, emergency services. So this area is typical of you know, it's not a downtown, it's not out in the middle of nowhere, it's residential. And so we just looked at recently, over the course of 45 days, there were 140 911 calls that our network captured. If our customer can't make a phone call on a T-Mobile network, it's going to find Verizon or AT&T or any other service provider. But in that 45 days, we had 140 911 calls, and most of those were outside of what was referred to as that most reliable area. So it's not in the green area; it's in the yellow or the orange. And then, so we looked at those locations and we said, hey, if we put this new tower here, we're going to improve 40% of those locations as well. And then this is just a map of those 140 calls. I apologize, those red dots don't represent anything bad. It's just the duration of the call. I should have put a different color there. Catch the eye a little bit. But it's just the duration of the call. And the reason I'd like to put that up is because imagine a person on a call for 20 minutes in a 911 emergency. You don't want your phone to drop, right? So that's very important for us to maintain that continuity. And the probability of being able to maintain that continuity is enhanced significantly by having the full suite of 5G services. Because if one of your service levels is inactive or it can't be reached, other service levels can be added into the channel, so to speak, to support those emergency calls. And of course, everybody knows how important cell phones are today, so we just want everything to work better, basically. Okay, good? Okay, thank you.
And Madam Hearing Examiner, Patrick Keen's resume is within that packet as well. And that includes applicant's case in chief, and we'll save the conclusions for rebuttal.
Thank you. Staff is ready. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Dirk Danley. I'm a principal planner with Lee County Zoning. I've been previously accepted as an expert witness in Lee County Land Development Code and Lee Plan. Would like to do so again today.
Yes, thank you.
I just wanted to clean up a couple items that were discussed in the presentation. There was a question about the development order process, I guess is probably more germane to what was being asked. The active development order that's on the property today would likely have two different routes, one of which is abandoning that development order, starting with a new one, or doing a certain type of amendment to it that you're able to do. I think there's a couple different thresholds for types of amendments before they would need to go to a full development order. I'm not sure if this would require that, but that option is also on the table as well. And then the second thing is about the tower collapse area. Attachment J of the staff report prepared by staff does include a letter certifying that collapse as well, and it describes how the tower would ultimately fail if it came to that point. Okay, I'll try to not overlap what the applicant's already gone through, because they've gone through pretty extensively at this point. But this is a special exception for a tower, 155 feet. There is two different variances that they're seeking, the first of which is to address height, going up, I believe 6 feet, less than 10% of the total height of the tower, and then reduce setbacks 59 feet to the east and west, and 63 feet to the south. The property is zoned commercial. It's in the Central Urban Future Land Use category and is located in the Lehigh Acres commercial overlay as well. This is just a picture of the site plan, so you can kind of see it in better context. This, both from this direction and from this direction, there is a 59-foot setback and then 65 feet to the south here. And so I believe it's 9th Street to the south, Edward Avenue to the east, and then Joel Boulevard to the west. And just zooming out a little bit more, and we'll probably come back to a similar scale aerial. There are not a significant number of residences that are abutting, but there are several that are nearby. And where it's located is ideal for, at least visually impacting the least number of single-family homes. As, even just adjacent to it, there's nothing here, there's nothing here, and then this is all built out, so that wouldn't necessarily change very much. The applicant's already gone through the propagation map explaining the benefits of the tower with this new construction standard versus what's today versus what they're proposing. And the applicant has gone through the special exception criteria, so we won't go through them at length, but this is a platted lot that's been cleared. There's no environmental sensitive features to the property. They will likely, during the development order process, have to go through ensuring that there's no burrowing owls or gopher tortoises on the property. And then the slew of zoning requirements that are in the land development code that they're going to have to comply with. And like I said, the applicant's gone through this, so I don't necessarily want to go into too much detail. I do want to speak to at least the lease agreement. There is one attached to the staff report as well, just for your review. So just to speak briefly on the variances again, staff does agree with the applicant and with the staff report as it's been prepared, that it does meet the criteria for variances, at least the first 5. There's a few of the additional criteria that staff doesn't believe meets, or not meets, but is not necessarily relevant to this case. We did do a little bit of an activity of bringing the site of what it would look like from a visual impact if we brought the site up to the required setback from the southern line, and it ended up having a significant impact on bringing more of these people that are going to be staring directly at a tower when they walk out versus down here as it's set up today. And so when staff was reviewing these decision-making criteria, one of the ones that always comes into play is this the minimum? And so the minimum variance, as we generally review these things, can be, I don't want to use the word arbitrary, but it's hard to quantify what that looks like in terms of, is it the minimum enough? And it's staff's stance that, the way that this tower is, and that they're seeking a similar setback on all sides, and they're not trying to stuff it on the absolute, boundary of the property. It's still having to meet the same setbacks as it would on the side. And that the fact that if they moved it anywhere else, there'd be a bigger visual impact. It's staff's opinion that this is really the minimum of what they're seeking. As it goes for the height, because of the demonstration of need in terms of the communication versus or on the propagation map, staff doesn't have any particular objection to the height that they're seeking, and because it's less than 10%, it really is a minimum or minimal change, at least in staff's eyes. I think the applicant's already gone and stated that this is an interesting shaped property, and with the characteristic of having roads on 3 sides, there really is an inherent condition on this property that would make it challenging to place a tower on this, let alone other types of commercial uses. The footprint is really small on this property of what it would be, versus a typical single or double frontage lot. With the placement of the tower, does reduce the injury to the neighborhood in terms of visual impact. It would be inappropriate to say that a tower doesn't have a visual impact, but based on the needs of the way the world's going, we find that they're kind of a necessary thing to have. And then the applicant did go through the lead plan analysis on this tower as well, and just going back to policy 5.1.5. The reduction of that visual impact by not sliding up the tower further along the block we find that that also meets the intent of that policy as well. So with that, staff does recommend approval with the conditions set out in the staff report, and we're here with any questions you may have.
I think that you addressed the questions that I had. Thank you. Did applicant have any questions of staff?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great, so with that, we will open up the public comment portion. So the first card that I have is for Ryan Maloney. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Maloney. I represent SBA Towers 2 LLC, which is the company that owns the existing cell tower that's 0.56 miles away, located at 112 Joel Boulevard. I did have a submission, not written opposition, I'd like to put into the record.
Thank you.
This has been provided to the applicant and to staff as well.
Okay, thank you. I'll accept that as Jimerson Exhibit 1.
And I have a PowerPoint as well. Do you want a written copy of it?
If you have it, that would
I
be.
do. Thank you.
Thank you. And that'll be Jimerson Exhibit 2. Thank you very much.
So just to kind of walk through, you know, I think it's important to note that T-Mobile is a current tenant on SBA's tower. I think that was testified to by the applicant's witnesses. We understand, and it appears that their plan is to move their equipment from SBA's tower to this new tower if it's approved. So we submit that we have standing to be here. And on this PowerPoint, I think we also did our own photo sims, I think from maybe a little bit closer vantage point that maybe be a little more relevant to the people that are living in these homes. And you know, the one on the left is existing, the one on the right is the photo sim of what it would look like. And as you can see, the entire top of it has the antenna on the outside of this tower. This is another one from the, I don't have, it's blocked out there, but it's from another vantage point, similar situation. And then here's one other one. I think it's important to note that, you know, this is a residential area. There are a lot of folks living here. This new tower would be approximately half a mile from SBA's existing tower. SBA has other tenants besides T-Mobile, so it's not its intent to take its tower down. You know, if this tower is built, there will be 2 towers within about a half a mile of each other. We all went through the variances, and they're significant. I mean, this is supposed to be a 155-foot variance, and in each case, it's almost it's over 90 feet reduction on each of the 3 sides. And I think we're allowed to ask you if you have questions on the rebuttal, and I would ask you to ask, I think, Mr. Keene, if T-Mobile looked at other potential locations for this tower where these types of variances may not be required, but that would fill T-Mobile's needs. I didn't hear any testimony to that effect. And I think it's important to also know, when we look at this, Joel Boulevard is a major arterial road. It's significant traffic there, and it would only be, I believe, 59 feet from the right-of-way of that road, and this is a 155-foot tower. So we don't believe that they've demonstrated that granting the variance will not be detrimental to the public welfare, in part because of the visual effect of having 2 towers in basically essentially the same neighborhood. And then also, we heard about the testimony about the tower collapse, and staff referenced the letter about the tower collapse. And the letter, you know, is a signed and sealed engineering opinion, and it's from Robert Beacom, who's not here today, with Sabre Industries. And his letter says that it's he's referring to a 160-foot monopole. And we know this is a 155-foot monopole. So he also says that, please note that this letter only applies to the above referenced monopole. So what has been submitted in the record does not apply to the tower that's sought to be constructed. Now, we've heard testimony from Mr. Sorry, I forgot his name, Mr. Bergeron, that he's looked at it, and that it's his opinion that it would collapse within the structure within the 75 feet. But I would ask you to ask him why this letter is not from him and why it's from Robert Beacom, why this letter references a 160-foot monopole versus a 155-foot monopole, and ask him when did he do his analysis, and does he have a signed and sealed engineering opinion to the effect of this engineering opinion. But in the record as it stands, the letter that was submitted doesn't qualify the tower that's at issue. And if this tower fell, I mean, we all know that hurricanes are a serious potential issue here. This 155-foot tower fell and did not collapse in on itself, and it went further than 63 feet or 59 feet, it could fall on Joel Boulevard, and there could be cars traveling in it. That is potentially a safety issue, and we would submit that there ought to be a signed and sealed written engineering opinion to establish this fact, and there's just simply not. So Tillman's also failed to meet each of the special findings in section 34-145-BA-4A, and we've noted a couple in the written document, but I'd like to focus mainly on the first one. And what it requires is that denial of this variance would have the effect of prohibiting the provision of personal wireless services. And we would submit that from the testimony that we've heard from T-Mobile's own engineer, denial of this variance would not prohibit anyone from providing personal wireless services. In fact, they're already providing personal wireless services on the existing tower. They've already got 5G equipment on the existing tower. And when you look at, this is from their own website that we pulled on Monday, it's the address there, 907 Edward Avenue, Lehigh Acres, that's where the tower, new tower is proposed to go. You'll have access to 5G ultra capacity coverage here. That's what T-Mobile says on its website. And then the dark color there, the 5G ultra capacity, is largely surrounding this area already as it exists based on public information. So, when we go back to what the requirement is, it's not that denial would have the effect of maybe making wireless service not quite as good as it could possibly be. Its denial would have the effect of prohibiting the provision of personal wireless services. And the evidence in the testimony in the record is not to that effect. And so our position is they have not met that requirement. And it's I'd like to hear the explanation for this if you would like to ask Mr. Keene about this, but this is from their website. And just, that's the site. If you want to look at it, Madam Hearing and Examiner, you can go to that website, put in the address, and you'll get the same printout that we saw. Now, going to the special exception, we also believe they haven't met all the requirements for this special exception. Some of these relate to the submittal requirements, the first of which is related to evidence of compliance with the FAA administration requirements under 14 CFR Section 77. Now, Tillman did provide a letter from the FCC in their package, but they did not provide a letter from the FAA. The purpose of this evidence of compliance is to ensure that the FAA requirements, not the FCC requirements, are met, and that this proposed tower would not be a hazard to air traffic. And I've handled a lot of these. You probably have too. The FAA will issue, if that's the case, a written determination of no hazard to air navigation. And we simply don't have that in this submission by the applicant. And without that, the applicant's not met this submittal requirement. We talked about staff mentioned that there's a lease. One of the requirements is if the property owner is not the provider, and we know the property owner is not T-Mobile, so they're not the provider, the application must include a copy of an executed lease agreement or memorandum of lease between the applicant or the property owner and a provider. So that means we need a lease between either Tillman or the property owner and T-Mobile, the provider. And we don't have that. What we have is an option and lease agreement between the property owner and Tillman, the applicant. There's not any evidence in the record that the option has actually been exercised, but in addition to that, there's no executed lease agreement between the property owner or Tillman and T-Mobile. And that's what the code requires, and it's not there. There's also not an affidavit from T-Mobile attesting to its intent to make application for the development order approving the proposed tower. Neither one of those is in the package, and so we would submit that the package is incomplete and it's not ripe to be ruled on at this hearing. As to the substantive requirements for the special exception, it's our position that they fail to demonstrate compliance with all the requirements. The one that we're focused on right now is C3, which relates to proliferation minimized. And the idea is you don't want too many of these towers too near each other because they acknowledge visual look. It doesn't look great, okay? And so what the code requires is that no antenna supporting structure will be permitted unless the applicant demonstrates that the proposed antenna cannot be accommodated on an existing building, structure, or antenna supporting structure. And we have the SBA tower on which they already have equipment. They have 5G equipment on this existing tower. It's within the search ring. And what we hear from T-Mobile is, well, we want to put better equipment on there, better 5G equipment. And you're going to hear, and we put in declarations both in the opposition I submitted, and Mr. Zhang, a structural engineer, is here to testify. But essentially, SBA is willing to, and has actually had drawings put together to modify its tower. And basically the modifications, and Mr. Zhang will expand upon them, it's basically just taking the canisters that were required, when the code was allowed the original tower, and just pushing them out a little bit and making them ventilated. And with that, the structural engineer, Mr. Zhang, will testify that it can accommodate the 5G, the ultra 5G equipment, even though it already has regular 5G equipment. And the declaration of Mr. Dawan, he's an RF, a person with SBA. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but these towers are so close to each other, there's significant duplication, rather than having a tower where there's a true coverage hole. There would be a lot of duplicative coverage. And then Brooke Irby is the site leasing manager for SBA, and her declaration states that these type of modifications happen all the time, and have happened before, and SBA is willing to do them. So, this is the drawing that Mr. Zhang, the structural engineer, has put together. He's with All Pro Consulting. It's not a final construction drawing, but it's a conceptual drawing to show what this would look like. And as you can see on the left, that's the existing tower, and you can see the canisters are closed in. What would need to be done is a little bit of an extension. I think it's 12 feet taller. And then at the top, pushing out the canisters and making them ventilated. So that would provide for the passive cooling to allow, and then space to allow the ultra 5G equipment. So, based on all of this and what you're going to hear from Mr. Zhang and the questions, we'd like to have asked, we submit that the proposed tower does not meet all of the county's code requirements, both in substance and in the requirements for submittal, and it's not ripe to be approved at this point, or potentially ever, considering that one of the requirements is that it has to be necessary, or that personal wireless services would not be able to be provided. I did a couple other questions, just briefly on what Mr. Keene testified to. I would ask him to be asked if T-Mobile has any record of any 911 call, any of those that he showed, ever being dropped with the existing tower. And then I would ask Mr. Keene, if you could ask Mr. Keene, yeah, I already asked about the location, so that's it. Well, thank you for your time. Do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Zhang. I'm just going to leave that up because he's going to talk about it.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Chu Zhang. I'm a structural engineer with Opera Consulting Group. Our company is based at 9221 Lyndon B. Johnson Freeway, Dallas, Texas. We're a consulting firm specializing in structural engineering for telecom structures such as these kind of towers. And I'm a licensed engineer for 6 years now, and I've been in the industry for almost 10 years. And I'm licensed in Florida, and this is actually my stamped and signed drawing. I was engaged by SBA to provide the structural analysis and the modification plan to upgrade the existing tower to accommodate future 5G equipment, actually not only for T-Mobile, but in this case they have existing carriers, so we did the expansion for all the existing carriers as well. So the modification would involve replacing the top 24 feet and 36 feet spine sections, which is on the left side, and replace them with 3 24 feet new sections that are beefed up. and we are going to bump out all the existing canisters from 32-inch outside diameter to 60-inch outside diameter, which is almost doubled. And we're going to provide a ventilated covering and also a 1-foot gap in between every carrier, so that the passive airflow is going to significantly be better than the original concealed design. We also received some heat transfer analysis studies from SBA. They actually hired a third-party expert to study on these kind of ventilated new designs, and it is actually significantly helpful for the T-Mobile 5G antennas. So in these study, it's not exactly for this site, but the equipment, I believe it is exactly the same as the T-Mobile 5G antenna in the radio. So overall, I think this tower is structurally capable of supporting all the 5G upgrade after these modifications, as you can see. And we're only extending it around 12 feet, which is 157 feet total after the modification. So it's like a couple feet taller than the proposed tower. And this kind of modification, in my experience, is normally taking around 3 months or less, which is significantly less time if you would have a new tower built completely from scratch. So, and overall, we do not need any modifications on the foundation and the bottom, like the lower half structure, which they are passing without a problem. And we can also design the new spine section so that it has a fall zone that's within the lease area. So overall, I do believe that the existing SBA tower has the exact capability of providing 5G support as what the applicant is proposing. So it's a duplicate, in my opinion.
I don't know the age of that existing tower. Do you know?
It's built in 2009.
Okay. Was it required at that point to collapse within the leased area, or do you? Or I couldn't. The last thing you just said, I wasn't sure if you were saying that was going to be a model.
I saw the original design. I think it's designed to first collapse at the top 24 feet. So it's going to drop that top 24 feet, and then it's going to drop at that where the spine section connects with the bottom larger tower. So it's going to completely fall off the top 2 and then start falling down from the bottom.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are these modifications being made regardless of if the current application moves forward or not, because you've got other characters?
Right. It's
that also
SBA's intent to expand all these kind of old canister poles. Actually, I have already done several projects for them in Florida as well as in Texas.
Okay. So the expansion, excuse me, the expansion that you're showing is going to move forward regardless of today's application proceeding or not?
I do not have the exact decision from SBA, but we have done several type of these regardless of, yeah.
And did you do the same analysis that the applicant demonstrated where they had the propagation map showing the increase in services? Do you know if you make these improvements, are those maps going to look fairly similar?
I'm not the RF engineer, and I believe that the SBA has one of Mr. Maloney's aforementioned in the PowerPoint, the contact was the SBA RF engineer, and he did the study. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does the applicant have any questions?
I do have one question. This may be, not sure who it would be tailored
Oh.
to, but
Yeah. I mean, I can hear it, and then if Mr. Maloney wants to answer, then.
sure. Will this require any kind of county approvals? And if so, have you approached county staff about the approvals?
Yeah. I think I'll just limit myself to the structural part of this argument.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would have to defer to staff, but I assume it may, just because the original, I think, order required that the everything be concealed. I don't know if that's not concealed by expanding or not. I think that would be maybe a staff interpretation. It's certainly more concealed than what the T-Mobile would be proposing.
Thank you. Did we want to go straight into rebuttal, or do you need any time to prepare any remarks for closing or rebuttal responses?
I think we're ready to go.
Okay, then please do.
Sounds good. And thank you, Madam Hearing Examiner. I do want to speak to a couple of points that was brought up in the opposition. Number one, the residential and commercial areas is, it's very clear that those are a prime spot for increased service area. And I do want to also speak to the process we went to in getting this approved. So we originally submitted the application in March of 2022, and we went through, and Dirk, correct me if I'm wrong, it was 4 or 5 sufficiency rounds to get this correct.
I think it was 4 for this one, yeah.
4 sufficiency rounds, multiple meetings with staff. We also did one community planning hearing that was spoken to in our presentation. So this is the first that we are hearing of a potential expansion of an existing tower in a year's worth of an application process. So we do believe that we are complete in our application. We do believe we meet the requirements for a special exception and the variances requested. We do agree with staff's recommendation of approval and the conditions that are set out, so we respectfully request that approval. And I did speak to Patrick, and he is able to rebut some of the oppositions if you'd like that.
And just to the point that you just said, you may have covered it. Were other properties considered when you were going through that year-long process? Was that part of the questions, or do you know if that was ever looked at, or if this property was specifically identified because of its location and where the need was desired?
I'm happy to get you that answer from Tillman. When I was originally brought in, it was in the application process, and I did speak to the site selection engineers about what their process, so I'm happy to get you those reports.
Okay, thank you.
Patrick,
Hello, Patrick Keene. I have been sworn in. So just in terms of some of the comments that were shared, when we define service area deficiencies, we're using engineering KPIs, we call them, key performance indicators. So it's a very complicated set of parameters and measurements we take and look at, and predictive models in order to say that an area has ultra capacity or is lacking in some sort of service feature. I understand that there's a difference between the way that we do our work and the way that it's marketed, which is essentially what the gentleman is referring to. So I just wanted to share that that's not how we engineer the system. So there's a lot of other things we're looking at.
Just to clarify for the record, so you're speaking to the magenta colored map that he was
Yes,
showing
correct.
from the website? Okay.
My apologies, yes.
No, that's okay, just so, okay, thank you.
The location for this site, so in general, when we need a location for a new tower, we just draw a circle on a map. So in one of the graphics, there was a blue circle. So that's what we call a search ring. And we give that to, we usually share that with, in this case, Tillman, which is a developer, and they go out and do the work and say, hey, we found a location where we think we can build a tower. And so we, T-Mobile, like myself and my colleagues, we don't go out there and drive around looking for locations and studying setbacks, et cetera. That's done by experts. So that's just and this was the only location that was presented to us. And
Before you do that, before you draw the circle, do you address because there is an existing facility presumably within the circle or near the circle that you drew, because it's a quarter mile or half a mile away, is there an opportunity to first try to retrofit, or whatever the correct terminology would be, the existing pole to accommodate what your needs are, or do you just automatically look for a new facility?
well, thank you. That's exactly where I was going. So in this case, this is the first time I've seen this design. I've been proposing equipment on towers for over 25 years. And it's very rare, if even existent, that an SBA or a Crown or ATC or any other service provider, tower owner, in my experience, would come to us volunteering they're going to upgrade a tower because I want to change the antennas. I just don't see that. I don't recall that ever happening. So this to me is a response to our initiative to say, listen, you guys aren't going to, I don't have that opportunity here. I want to create another opportunity. And so that looks like a good design to me, from if what the gentleman was saying is true. So, but I'd have to take that back to our office, speak with my colleagues, come up with planning, but you know, it's not something I've seen before. And then the other question was about the 911 calls. Did we have any 911 drop calls? Meaning that the person's on a cell phone and then all of a sudden there's no communication. It just drops, we call it. So in this data set, the 45 days worth of data, I didn't look for drop calls, but but there are definite degradations in the service levels. So when a cell phone makes a 911 call, there's a protocol of steps it goes through. You know, can I find T-Mobile for my customers or our customers? Can I find T-Mobile? Can I get? It'll start on 5G, then 4G, and a percentage of the calls in that area, maybe 30%, they were made from a 2G service. So the phone couldn't get 5G, couldn't get 4G, couldn't get 3G, could only get 2G, which is sort of our, you know, just a blast case emergency issue. So to answer the questions, I didn't see any drop calls in this set of data, which it does happen though, just like drop calls happen anywhere. But there was definite degradation depending on where that person was.
Thank you. Does staff have any questions? Thank you. Was there additional rebuttal that you wanted to put on the record?
No additional.
Did staff have any rebuttal comments that you would like to make?
Yeah. Just want to hit a couple brief comments. There was a question asked whether or not the, let's say, rehabilitation of this tower would require any action from our end. I was looking over the conditions for what I believe is a special exception approval. The names seem to line up, but it's SEZ2022-00003. It does provide extra conditions about the specific design of the tower and prohibition of exceeding 149 feet. So between those two things, we'd probably expect to see a special exception come in. I did want to note that this approval also has variance approval for reduced setbacks on this because it's a similarly dimensioned lot. So just wanted to put that on there. I don't have that paper copy here, but we can provide that if that's something that you have interest in.
It was SEZ 2008-00019?
Yes.
Thank you.
And I did want to speak to a couple different things. Probably the most important one is he did bring up the FAA letter of no hazard to navigation. They did provide an analysis. I don't actually believe it was provided by the FAA. I believe the company was Tow Air, and staff believes that the report does sufficiently address that. But if you would like to leave the record open for them to be able to provide that, I think there's merit to that as well. So we certainly are open to that happening. I think those are really the only two that I wanted to address. If there's any other questions that you wanted to ask.
I was trying to locate quickly while I've got it here, and you might have it more at your fingertips, with regard to the question about the attachment J letter speaking to potentially a different pole. I mean, it's a larger pole than what we're talking about here today, but I don't know if it was a Scrivener's error or something else, but there's several requirements of a statement of position, qualifications, and experience by a qualified engineer. I don't know that that collapsibility of the pole is one of them that requires that. Do you happen to know offhand?
That qualified sealed and signed letter is going to be a required time of development order and that building permit. We look for that to ensure that they're going to be compliant with that, and we've accepted in the past just commitment to that as part of the zoning, understanding that whatever they're designing, if it can't meet that, then they're going to have to change the site plan, they're going to have to change something else to make that land development code requirement work, because
But it would be a sufficiency requirement, and we've got the testimony of the engineer here today. I just want to be sure procedurally that those checks are, if we need to leave the record open because it wasn't provided and it was required as part of the application, that's where I'm trying to.
I don't have a full list of the things he said that were missing.
That was the one that I was specifically looking at. Was there are various ones throughout the code, and I went through that with the documents that I had and what
Yeah.
I had in my record all lined up.
Yeah.
attachment J was not one that was on my radar before now, and so I just want to be sure that that was not a sufficiency item.
No, they provided it, and we were happy with that. And oftentimes, as you're probably aware with various other zoning cases, is sometimes the letters ask for more than what they're actually going to get by the time they get to zoning. So without recalling the first submittals of this case, this may have started out as 160 foot and come down, or maybe during just the design itself, before they submitted, that came down, and staff would have found that to be sufficient, and with an understanding that they were going to need to design it that way.
And on the proliferation point, to your knowledge, when the county application came in to staff, what you've reviewed, this alternative wasn't known to you before today. I don't know when this was made known to you, but that wasn't in your evaluation, because the finding that you have to make is that it cannot be accommodated on an existing building structure.
Correct.
Or something like this. So you made that finding because this information was new.
Correct. Yeah, we would make that finding even now today, knowing that there's no application active. We haven't had any pre-application. At the risk of sounding like this is a speculative design, we would expect it to be a little bit further ahead in this case.
Okay, thank you. Did the applicant have any questions of the staff?
No
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Were there any closing comments that you would like to make before we complete the record?
And I think I accidentally made my conclusion earlier, but just wanted to reiterate that we believe we've met all of these special exception and variance criteria, both the general and the specific criteria. We do agree with staff's recommendation of approval and are amenable to all of the conditions, and if we can follow up with any additional information, we'd be happy to. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, did staff have anything final? I'm sorry not to give you that opportunity. Okay, so with that, we will conclude the hearing for today and close the record. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and you will all get a copy of the decision once it's released. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.